Hey everyone, Rob from Southgate Media Group here. Before we get started with this podcast, we have a quick message. If this is your first time checking out the show, we love that you found us and we really hope you enjoy it. What we have to say is for the subscribers. If you enjoy our shows, would you please donate to help keep these going? We don't want to have to put traditional ads on these shows, but this does cost money. So we really do rely heavily on donations. To make a donation to the show, please go to our website, www.southgatemediagroup.com. Go to the page for the show, and in the upper right-hand corner is a donate button. It takes you right to PayPal, and you can donate whatever amount you want. Thanks a lot for listening, everybody. And now, on with the show.
Give me sight beyond sight.
Greetings, Starfighter. You are about to listen to the totally super awesome 80's Reboot Overdrive podcast. Always remember, no matter where you go, there you are. Ready Player One.
The Russians need to take us in one piece, and that's why they're here now. That's why they won't use nukes anymore, and we won't either, not on our own soil. The whole damn thing's pretty conventional now. Who knows, maybe next week will be swords.
What started it?
I don't know, two toughest kids on the block, I guess. Sooner or later, they're gonna fight.
That's simple.
Maybe somebody just forgot what it was like.
Well, who is on our side?
600 million screaming Chinamen.
Well, last I heard there were a billion screaming Chinamen.
There were.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special, very odd-ish edition of 80's Reboot Overdrive. Due to circumstances beyond our control, Dave has ascended into heaven this week, and we are making do with what we have here. I am Nick. I am joined today by a special guest. You might know him as Mushmouth from Fat Albert.
Hub. I like that you've referred to me as special 3 times already. Thank you.
You are very welcome, because you are very special to me. No, in fact, this is former 80's Reboots guest assistant Mike, who is graciously allowed me to talk at him this week, despite the fact that he has several gallons of Novocaine in his lower jaw, apparently.
That's about what it takes to numb me, too. So.
Yep, so say hello, Mike.
Hello, Mike.
Shut up, Mike.
Yeah.
Anyway, so given that we are sort of shooting from the hip, as I said this week, we're going to do a little different tack, just maybe a different topic from what we've done in the past week. So it's the 80s, and we talked about movies like Rocky IV and Top Gun. They all had a very common thread going through all of them.
Yep.
And indeed, that decade did. And I, of course, am speaking of the Red Menace.
Red Menace.
You know, cue Song of the Vogelboatman. But so, yep, we were just going to be talking about a bunch of different things that concerned America's favorite enemy du jour for several decades, which came to a head in the 80s.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember being absolutely inundated with it. They were the go-to villains, like anywhere you looked when I was a kid.
Oh God, yeah. Oh, no matter what, and especially the 80s. And I didn't realize this until I became an adult, but the 80s was some of the closest times we ever were to Doomsday, apparently.
Yeah.
The Doomsday Clock was actually fairly close.
Yep.
And we were sitting there watching G.I. Joe, so who would have thunk it?
Right. You know, just really quick, it always weirded me out that when I watched G.I. Joe, usually the Red Scare, the Soviets, the Reds, in G.I. Joe, weren't the good guys their laser guns, weren't they red? And the bad guys were blue?
Weirdest thing, wasn't it?
Isn't that trippy?
You'd think like Cobra would be the red laser, but no.
I always thought about that ever since I was a little kid, because we were so indoctrinated with that red, that red color being bad.
weirdest thing, and actually, I think thank you for the segue because one of the things that we are sort of the examples of, I don't know, red bad guys, although they weren't as bad as say Cobra, was the recurring characters in both the comics and the cartoon of G.I. Joe of the October Guard.
Yeah.
You remember those guys?
I remember them vaguely. Like, I remember them by name, but I can't see them visually. But I mean, how many characters in G.I. Joe had, bad guys had Russian accents to begin with? It was like...
Oh, totally. Well,
every other episode
had the sort of generic Slavic, but yeah.
Well, yeah. Right. So what was exactly their deal? Were they just generic Russians?
Well, they were sort of the Russian counterpart to G.I. Joe. They were like a spec ops unit.
Oh, okay.
And the first time the Joes met them in comics, that actually have like one of the old comics collections, is that the Joes were investigating obviously something Cobra was doing, but Cobra was getting really close to the Soviet soil or the Eastern Bloc, and the Russians had sent out the October Guard. And much like any teams in comics that first meet up, they of course have to have a fight.
Right.
Yeah. And but then they eventually realized that the true enemy was not communism or capitalism, but the evil forces of Cobra, a terrorist organization determined to rule the world.
So the October Guard eventually did bro up with the Joes?
Yes, it was one of those enemy mine situations.
Okay. Oh, yep. Enemy mine.
Exactly.
That's a whole nother podcast.
That'd be
that would be a great podcast.
Yeah, the characters were Horror Show, Shrage, Dinah, Stromovic, Colonel Brekov, and I remember in the original team there was a guy I think named Sergeant Gorky.
Gorky, yes.
Gorky, yeah.
No, wait. You said Horror Show, but I heard Horror Show at first, and I was like, really? I mean, it seems.
No, it is Horror Show.
Is it really?
Yeah. Here's the description actually. Horror Show is a big, looking very much on the stout side, and not exactly the brightest mind of the October Guard. Still, his superiors like him for one thing. Whenever they tell him what to do, he does whatever it takes to get the job done. Yeah, he was this big guy with a big sort of Stalin-esque mustache.
Was he a big bruiser?
Yeah, big bruiser, yeah.
Wow, a Soviet character who was a big dumb bruiser. Who would have thought of it?
Yes, and that was another, common thread. Of course, the times that we weren't working with the Russians against a larger enemy, they were just a big, strong, silent.
Comrade. Well, all right, here's a question. Do you consider Zangief from Street Fighter II a villain?
No.
Right?
I thought about that because he wasn't a villain. He wasn't fighting against anyone. He was fighting for Russia, but he wasn't really against anyone.
Yeah, it's funny too because when you ask people who aren't like total video game nerds about Zangief, a lot of the people I've talked to associate him with like being a bad guy. Maybe just because he was a Soviet character, and he doesn't look particularly friendly either.
No, big bruiser Russian guy.
But yeah, I mean that's an instant recognition of bad guy was Russian. Then that's the perfect example right there is Zangief.
And of course the what was his ending? But the Gorbachev coming to do the squat dance.
Yep. And also did you see Wreck-It Ralph?
I haven't seen it beginning yet. I've seen enough parts of it though. It's one of those things where I haven't had a chance to like sit down and watch it, but I've seen plenty of it.
But there's this one scene in Wreck-It Ralph where it's like the Bad Guys Anonymous. That Wreck-It Ralph is technically a bad guy, and Zangief is there, and it gave me pause. I'm like, Zangief. He even refers to himself in the movie as a bad. He goes, "I may be a bad guy, but I'm not a bad guy." Well, so
I read somewhere that originally it was supposed to be like Dr. Wily and another villain, but they couldn't get the rights.
Rights, yeah.
So that they had to sort of shove Zangief in there.
I'm kind of amazed they got the rights to Zangief and Bowser.
Zangief was we're sort of cheating here because Street Fighter II came out in 91, but it was sort of at the tail end of the Cold War.
That's true.
Yeah.
I take full responsibility.
That's fine. because originally when it came out, Gorbachev was still Mr. President, or Mr. Premier, and then when it came to the home consoles, it was like Mr. Former President.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Let's see, another big, silent, taciturn guy, of course, Ivan Drago. And we covered that in a recent 80's reboot. We'll talk about Rocky 4, but that was definitely a movie that was openly political.
Yeah, big time.
I mean, the first screen was the American flag boxing glove turning, and then the hammer and sickle boxing glove turning, Eye of the Tiger playing, and boom.
The thing I remember most about that movie, though, is with Ivan, he had this like super futuristic, training facility, yeah, which was interesting to me. Well, I mean, I guess it makes sense because, I don't know, maybe you associate military with technology. And, since they were, the whole Cold War military thing, maybe that's why they put it that way. But a lot of other themes that dealt with the Russians dealt with them as being like, dudes in the forest wrestling bears and whatever. So I thought it was kind of interesting that they gave, maybe it was like to juxtapose Rocky, the down home
training methods.
Yeah, with the big future guy. Make it seem like, the American working man can beat the foreign.
Well, yeah, I think it was. I mean, definitely, because and I guess I think Stallone said it was supposed to be like it was supposed to emphasize his lack of heart, that he wasn't like that he was using this very just sort of clinical training method.
Yeah.
Not to mention juicing.
Right.
But
using venom.
Proto-pain, seriously. But it's like, but if ever there was, I mean, even now when we think of Soviet villain, we think of the Swedish man playing the Russian.
Yeah.
And but yeah, I mean, just like, you will lose.
I will break you.
I must break you. And of course you got Apollo coming out there.
Yeah.
To James Brown in his flag shorts, and Ivan just goes boom, done.
Yeah. I have not seen any of the Rockies in a long time, and I think I'm well overdue. So I think that's my homework after this podcast.
I mean 1 and 2 are the most normal ones. 3 gets a little out there with Mr. T.
Oh yeah.
4 just goes off the rails.
Yeah.
5 doesn't exist.
5 is the one where they fought with lasers in space.
Exactly. That was, I don't know what they were thinking about that, but they deserved that Oscar. And then there was Rocky Balboa. But,
right. So I was gonna say, which was the one right before Balboa? I couldn't remember how many there were.
Yeah, there was 5. And another thing is they wanted to emphasize like the inhumanness of the enemy. Was they showed Drago. I think like they said he had like his punching power was like 1100 psi. For those more scientifically inclined in the audience, I looked that up.
It's over 9,000.
That's actually a shotgun blast.
What?
Yeah, so they were trying to show that his punches were actually the equivalent of a shotgun blast, so one punch should have actually taken Rocky's head off.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But then, of course, at the very end, Rocky, ends the Cold War by making the speech. and the Politburo is right there, and not Gorbachev gets up and starts doing the slow clap.
Right.
So we won the Cold War on that one.
So another movie that I remember,
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember if I saw it or if I just saw bits of it, but explain Red Dawn.
Red Dawn, I actually had to go back and check this one out.
You see?
I know. Red Dawn it tells the story of this alternate, unspecified 80s time where just sort of
19XTX.
19XX, around the time Mega Man was created. The like resource wars in Eastern Europe, the bad harvest, I guess, in the Soviet areas, the whole Iron Curtain forced they never actually, I don't think they ever actually come out and say, the Russians.
They do that with so many movies in the 80s.
They just say them,
Yeah, them. Those red guys.
Expected to figure out that guys with Russian accents who can't speak English.
The ones with the blue lasers.
Exactly. But yeah, no, that they launch a straight up attack of the United States, and ironically, I downloaded the Riff Tracks version with Mike Nelson and Joel McHale of the Soup, just riffing on it. And the scene that they use as a sample is the actual paratroop landing of the not Russians, and it's them just in winter camo, parachuting down without a word, getting things set up. The teacher comes out, tries to ask what's going on. All of a sudden, boom, just no words. Like, no expectation of surrender, no freeze, no nothing. Just boom, okay, everyone dies. And that's when they take over the area, and then the teenagers murder switches get flipped remarkably quick. I mean, even with these, extenuating circumstances of their town being, pretty much garrisoned and, loyalty squads and all that. But no, the urge to kill just goes right there, and Wolverines, But yeah, and of course we get a lot of the memetics from the 80s Wolverines. But something I didn't realize until I watched it again, and I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is true, where how people go, "Avenge me!"
Yeah,
they lose one. It came from that movie. One of the characters' fathers is rounded up in this internment camp, and they try to save him, and he gets pulled away by the guards, and it's the most over-the-top thing in the world. He's like, "Avenge me, son! Avenge me!"
Oh my God!
Not run, not be safe, not take care of your family, live well. Avenge me!
Yeah. The remake of this movie, I'm fairly certain they used North Korea as the threat.
They used North Korea because they didn't want to anger the Chinese.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, yes, even now it's a little gauche to, say, "Oh, evil nation coming to take us over." but really, North Korea. I don't see it.
Well,
crazy.
At least we know they're never going to get the DVD copy. So
yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
if there was one safe nation.
I mean, not to get political here, but I don't see the North Koreans parachuting into the U.S. and
no, because they'd be jetpacked.
A whole lot of anything. The closest I could see them doing is like anyone in the audience who's ever played Secret of Mana, the game Secret of Mana, where they were you had to places, you would use a giant cannon to shot where you can go. I could see that happening, maybe but not a full scale air invasion.
Oh my God! North Korean cannon soldiers. Oh,
that was our political part of 80s Reboot.
But that's amazing.
But yes, getting back to Red Dawn. But yes, no, that it does have its I guess you could say neat moments of it shows what like living under a oppressive regime is.
Yeah.
But then, like, I can't remember if it's implied that other girl groups sprung up independently, or if the Wolverines were some sort of an inspiration. But then it shows some unspecified years later that we took back the country.
Well, wait,
and and it will memorialize that because of course World War III would have begun and ended in the Pacific Northwest and with student girl groups rather than a full scale nuclear conflict.
Right.
But
that was the thing, right? It was like a high school.
It was a high school. It was a high school students.
Yeah.
In fact, let me just check the cast. Yeah, I think we had the usual suspects. I know Patrick Swayze was in it.
Well, what was the flick? Wasn't there a movie where there was like high school protagonists with Will Wheaton fighting back? What am I thinking of?
Oh no, you're thinking of the movie Toy Soldiers.
Oh, that's what I'm thinking.
With there was a unspecified terrorist group.
Right, that's what I'm thinking of.
Over the boarding school. I'm amazed I remember that.
I'm amazed you remember that too.
Because I saw it once when I was about 9.
Yeah.
But yeah, oh no, you got your Swayze, you got your C. Thomas Howell, Leah Thompson, Charlie Sheen.
Wasn't it basically the entire cast of like The Breakfast Club plus Dirty Dancing?
It was almost a
Of the Brat
a
Pack.
Dirty Dancing. Well, no, Dirty Dancing came later. So but yeah, no, it had Jennifer Grey.
Yeah.
And Swayze in it. Ron O'Neal, Superfly.
What?
Was Colonel Ernesto Bella. I forgot about that. Yeah.
No way.
Yep. Harry Dean Stanton was in it.
Oh, sweet. All right, I'm gonna have to go back and watch this piece.
I know, and Powers Booth as like the big,
nice.
The big good army guy.
You know what is awful of me to say, but I cannot remember. I didn't know who Powers Booth was until I watched Sin City. And after I saw him in Sin City, I'm like, oh crap, he's been in everything.
I know, he's just one of those guys.
Yeah,
you know?
he's that face.
Yep, and he typically does evil guys. And he was actually kind of heroic in this.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like Michael Ironside always plays the heavy, except Starship Troopers.
Oh, oh no, I'm sorry. It wasn't just Soviets. It was Soviet, Nicaraguan, and Cuban troops. Landing on the field. So
that's the 80s trifecta.
Exactly.
Really quick. and I think it's the Onion Atlas.
Mm-hmm. Our Dumb World.
Our Dumb World, yeah. If you go to, I think it's Nicaragua.
Mm-hmm.
If you the whole page is Contra. It's got screenshots from the NES Contra, and it talks about the 30 lives code and everything.
Red Falcon fought here. I remember that, and I honestly at this point don't remember if we ever covered Contra on 80's Reboot, but if not, why not?
Yeah.
I'll do that.
I'll jump. Let's do some NES 80s Reboot, and I'll jump in on that.
And but then going from Red Dawn, I think we need to anytime you wanted to denote, and also anytime you wanted to denote, U.S. versus Russia, all you had to do was say red something.
Yeah. Yep.
Red ketchup.
Red ketchup.
But I was thinking of and getting back on the fact of the big silent Russian, one of the great cinema offerings of the 80s, 1988's Red Heat.
Oh right, that's another one I haven't seen, but I know about.
With Baby
Belushi,
Schwarzenegger, because you could never, of course, get a proper, Russian actor.
Yeah, right.
Well, because everything was closed off, then you couldn't exactly film in the middle of Red Square.
Right.
But as Colonel Ivan Danko, that's
of course he was.
Of course he was, and Jim Belushi as the unlikely American partner, because Schwarzenegger's character is tracking down Russian criminals to smuggle drugs and a bunch of other things.
Okay.
And work together and create common ground.
So he was Interpol style coming to the U.S. trying to snatch
a Georgian drug lord who killed his partner.
Okay.
And that within the movie itself, they didn't want to say directly a Russian bad guy. No, he was Georgian.
Yeah, right, exactly.
He wasn't Russian. No, he was Georgian.
Right.
But no, and that was another sort of weird thing. Like if they didn't want to, straight up say Russians, like the Russians were the bad guys, because it wasn't. I mean, maybe someone else could correct me, but in the 80s, even though we came close to, nuclear Armageddon, in the movies at least, we weren't as keen on just straight up demonizing.
Yeah.
I mean, it was always either a renegade Russian faction.
Right. Those red guys over there. Because it was a Cold War. Because, if they were going to drop anything straight out, into the media, then who knows? It's... Well, you said Top Gun, too. And I thought... Because I always thought they were doing stuff in Myanmar in Top Gun, but it was Miramar, and that's what confused me.
Yep.
But yeah, they said that they were MiGs flying around. Those are Russian planes.
Yep.
But they never actually said Russian.
No. And, and something else, with that movie, and it's, masculine overtones, and Maverick Ice, and the death of Goose, the thing that a lot of people tend to forget is Maverick started World War III.
Yeah.
And no one seemed to notice.
Yeah.
Because yes, the Russians were encroaching on our airspace, but we went back and shot a bunch of them down.
Right.
And yeah, so I'm not sure how that didn't escalate beyond that, but sure.
Well, they weren't actually Russians, Nick. Remember?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. They were just planes that happened to have hammers and sickles on them.
Yeah, that were actually F5s rather than MiGs.
Right.
But that's a whole other topic.
But the hammer, it was actually a squeaking hammer and a scythe, so it's not.
Oh,
it's not
okay.
the same thing.
Yeah, they were Russian. They were
Right.
with two O's.
Russian.
Yeah, Rush. But I guess what's funny about Red Heat is, as silly as it is here in America, in Russia they love it. Oh my God, they love it because not only because it's Schwarzenegger and Belushi and just kind of a weird premise to begin with.
Wait, really? You think they loved it because of Belushi?
Okay, Schwarzenegger then.
Okay.
But it was, I guess, like just the accents, the inaccuracies, like Schwarzenegger's, KGB uniform has like 3 different epaulets on it. It's just a mishmash of just all these different military uniforms, so that they love that.
So is it one of those so bad it's good?
Yeah, at least, and especially to them,
Yeah.
especially the Russians, and like I guess how the quote unquote Russian is spoke in the film.
Yeah.
It would be. It's
Ridiculous.
like how English is spoken in anime.
That's just what I was gonna say. Andropov, look at this Rushkrish.
Yeah, Rushkrish. And let's see.
That's really hard to say with a mouthful of Novocaine, by the way.
Yeah, I think you're I think you're doing really good there. So let's see. Oh, here's a bit of trivia. The film crew applied for a permit to film in the Red Square, but the application was denied.
Yeah.
So the crew had to sneak film the Red Square scenes. They dressed up Arnold in the uniform and filmed him as though he was making an amateur home movie.
No way.
There's a couple of crew people present. Yep.
Wow.
I thought I read something about they had to sneak the shots of Red Square.
I'm surprised they got away with it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have that started World War III?
I was gonna say I'm surprised that let's see, it was 88. So yeah, Gorbachev. I'm surprised that Gorbachev wasn't like, hey. Something else, like definitely about especially in the 80s. You and I have played a lot of pen and paper RPGs in the past and read a lot of comics, and maybe it seemed more likely then. I mean, looking back at it now, hindsight's always 20/20, but they seem to think that the Soviet Union would last for if not a couple hundred years, like 1,000 years,
Yeah.
So you get like all those futuristic things with like the original first couple of edition Shadowrun, and
Yeah, that's true.
and Cyberpunk, where even then it's like this like hyper techno like Soviet setting.
Yep. There was even back in even in the 90s. So here in Chicago we had North Pier, and North Pier is where they hosted the BattleTech, the actual pods that you sat down in.
Mm-hmm. Oh wow!
And there were a lot of clans that I can remember that were at my particular BattleTech that were all like Russian themed. Because if you were a regular there, you could make your own clans and sigils and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But they definitely had a red presence in the game, and BattleTech took place in bajillion years in the future.
Yeah, just like this like far future. Yeah.
And it was still present, so that was pretty. And that was the 90s, so that's still pretty.
Yeah. Well, after that, they sort of had to kind of take an eraser to certain things. It was always like they would affix, hardline Russians who want to bring back, the Soviet way of life rather than just the straight up Soviets.
Yeah.
Or, I have to wonder, because even though it's not quite the 90s, it was set in, or quite the 80s. It was a 1999 movie. But it was set in 85, The Hunt for Red October.
Yeah.
And great movie. And the book was, set in the 80s, but it's like, but at the very beginning of it, they always say, shortly before Gorbachev came to power, and then that's the way set up the story. So they sort of had to. I'm wondering if that was just like such an 11th hour edition.
Yeah.
Because I think that came out either right before or right after, just the fall, of the Soviet Union.
Yep.
So I'm wondering if like some guy in the editing room was just like, damn it, okay, yeah. No, this is a long time ago.
Right before it happened. Yeah. No, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. Get the white out. Yep.
And speaking of Russian bad guys in fiction, I do have to wonder if during that whole scenario where the the revolution, and they were the hardliners were trying to oust Gorbachev from power, and they failed, and the Berlin Wall comes down, and Hasselhoff singing on the wall there. I'm wondering if Tom Clancy, rest his soul, wasn't sitting in this dark room with just a bottle of Jack Daniels next to him, just silently going, "Oh God, now I have to think of new bad guys.
Now I need to actually make real stories. I don't have that excuse anymore." And then he immediately went to Afghanistan.
Well, yeah. That was the next logical step.
Yep. Who's the next group that I can vilify for an entire generation?
And well, unfortunately, we didn't have to wait too long.
Right.
And then I'm thinking of, I was trying to think of TV when I was thinking of this topic.
I can't think of very much TV wise.
No.
Again, I was talking to you about this earlier. If it had live action, I probably didn't watch it as a kid. It had to be cartoons.
Neither did I. I mean, the most I could think of is if it was a show with, younger kids or teenagers, and it was some sort of school competition.
Yeah.
A lot of times it'd be against, oh God, these
the jerky Russian kids.
The jerky Russian kids.
Who are all 12 feet
Americans, tall. You are uneducated and we are 6'5",
Although, no, Captain Planet was 90s, because they had a Russian girl on, that team, and that was a good guy.
But it was, let's see, Captain Planet was 90s, but I remember that for the longest time, they identified her in the intro, Linka, as from the Soviet Union.
Yep.
And I think even in the pilot episode, when Wheeler was talking to her, he's like, "Oh, so you're Russian?" She's like, "No, I am Soviet."
Well, all right. So let's talk about comic books then for a minute, because there's a ton of, God, if I remember Russian influence, it's comics in the 80s for sure.
Of course, yeah, definitely.
Because we were talking about, we were looking up before this Crimson Dynamo.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no clue how many iterations of the Crimson Dynamo had gone through. But that was another. So this is one of the things I wanted to bring up is the Abomination, or
Blonsky,
various characters that were kind of Soviet but not quite, because he wasn't Russian.
No,
Blonsky was Yugoslavian.
Yeah,
I think, but everybody gets lumped together in that Russian category.
No, Russian spy, Imo Blonsky.
Yeah, he was Russian then.
Yeah, I'm looking up. Thank you, Marvel Comics Database.
Yeah.
He was. He was a communist Croatian Yugoslavian spy.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was sort of they had free reign to just say, yep, communist. Oh,
yeah.
Very easy to make them bad guys.
It's the catch-all term.
Yeah, you didn't have to be even proper Russian. You could be anywhere from the whole Soviet bloc.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's true. That's the thing, because I was just thinking Russian in general, but yeah, it is the Soviet Union idea.
Yep, but yeah, they have to and then, Crimson Dynamo, who was merged with Whiplash in the Iron Man movies,
right? Which is why it confused me, and I couldn't tell who the hell he was.
Exactly, and they can't do that now, so he was Russian, but he was instead of a spy or whatever, he was part of the Russian mob.
Yeah.
So they have to, if they want to use a Russian now, and especially if it's grandfathered in, they have to either be some hardliner bringing it back.
Yep.
Or just some other manner of Russian bad guy. They can't say, "Oh, communist."
Right. Exactly.
Just the further and further we get away from it, current politics in Russia notwithstanding.
Right.
We can't immediately have them be the go-to guys as,
Although I do have to say, I think they should remake Red Dawn one more time, but the only one getting dropped in is just Putin with no shirt. I think it should just be him running around busting people in the face and ripping them in half. I would watch that.
Everyone in the U.S. would watch that.
And probably in Russia.
We probably would. No, we probably would. And I hate to say this, but wait for it. I mean, they're remaking remakes at this point, so just wait for it.
I know.
But yeah, and comic books and one of the things I definitely want to talk about, because I had this comic series. It was collected in a book, and my mom got it for me at a car trip, and I loved it.
What?
But it's so very 80s. It was a Batman story called 10 Nights of the Beast.
That sounds familiar. What is that?
Yep. It was a Batman story. It was from the 80s. They reprinted it. It was from like the mid 80s, and it concerned the very first appearance of the wonderfully named Russian assassin, the KGBeast.
Oh, there we go.
Yep, and yes, and later you find out he had a protege called the NKV Demon, but that's a whole other story. But no, the KGBeast was sent, or no, he wasn't sent. No, you find out it was a rogue operation where he went to the U.S. to eliminate key members involved in the Star Wars initiative. So if that doesn't date it right there,
geez, the Star Wars defense.
Yep, the SDI, and and it was Batman, like, because in the comics at that time, you know, he was in Gotham City. I guess, like, there, for one reason or another, there was this big concentration of research done in Gotham at the time.
Okay.
So, and the Beast was just rubbing all these scientists and, you know, technicians out, and Batman's, you know, trying to follow his trail, and it keeps frustrating him because he's always one step behind, because he's like this like, you know, Russian Superman.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, you know, Batman actually does corner him at one point, and he thinks he's got him because he gets this rope tied around the guy's wrist, and he's hanging from this building. Batman thinks that he's just gonna pull him up, and he's got him. The guy takes a fire axe, and cuts his own hand off.
Criminy.
Go
ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna say that he gets this like cybernetic cannon hand, but that's neither here nor there. It just makes it that much more dangerous.
Cannon hand.
And this is around the time where things got a little more realistic, because actually some of the murders were pretty bad.
Yeah.
Like, he poisoned an entire banquet just to get to one guy. He used nerve gas disguised as orange juice in someone's fridge. But the thing that makes it so very 80s is that, you know, they keep talking about, they're going down this list of important people, and they keep saying, you know, they've got the one name at the bottom of the list they want to make, you know, damn sure he doesn't get, and they just keep whispering it. At the very, like, the second to last issue, he goes, well, now we have to stop the Beast from assassinating, and the big splash panel, Ronald Reagan, President of the United States. And the last issue actually had, because Reagan was coming into town for this function in Gotham City, Batman kidnaps Reagan to get in public, to get him to, like, and to get him into safety, and they do this whole false flag gambit with, like, a false Reagan to have Batman catch him. And he does stop the Beast. It kind of stops him in a kind of an anticlimactic way. He gets him in a cul-de-sac and locks him in. Because he goes, a couple of years ago, I would have jumped at the chance to test myself against you, but I honestly know I probably wouldn't win, so.
Oh my god. Was Beast he wasn't like a superhero, right? He was just or a supervillain, rather. He was just a Batman type character?
Yeah, he was just like this, yeah, I guess
he was just hardcore.
Badass normal.
All right.
Just like this hyper-trained, I don't think they went the Captain America super soldier route, but he was just like super high-trained, lethal assassin. Gotcha. Oh, and he had this sidekick who was a terrorist. He was like, I forget. Oh no, that was another thing of the enemy du jour that went along with the Red Menace. The Ayatollah.
Oh, yeah.
The Iranians at the time. So, yeah, but there was an Iranian terrorist that he was working with. Robin took him out. But yeah, so that was like a straight up. But even then, they like at the very beginning, it talks about how this like mad Russian general sanctioned this operation and killed himself. And the KGB actually went to the U.S. and was like, yeah, no, we don't want this.
I need to make a quick detour really quick because I'm flipping through my phone while we're speaking, just looking at other like communist or Soviet villains that have been, you know, vilified. Mm-hmm. And I swear to you, on this list is Jabba the Hutt.
Wait, what?
I don't understand why they're putting Jabba in the communist camp, but
no.
I just figured I would put that out there because that's too funny not to bring up.
You could use a lot of terms to describe Jabba the Hutt.
Communist ain't one of them.
No. He's very much a capitalist.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But, and then, like, I don't know because you, Mike, of course, you and I are very much into the same things. I don't know if you've ever read a comic story called Camelot 3000.
No.
Ever hear of it or read it?
No, it doesn't sound familiar. What's the deal?
It was put out by DC's British imprint.
Okay.
It is actually done by an author I like, Mike Barr. He did a lot of good stuff in the 80s.
Okay.
But the storyline goes is that 1,000 years into the future, humankind is divided into 4 major power blocks. You got the U.S., the Soviet bloc,
Mm-hmm.
the Asian sphere with run by China, and Africa run by the Supreme Rahma, and every single one of the leaders that you see in the book is based off of someone in the 80s.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even subtle. The U.S. quote-unquote president is dressed as Uncle Sam, and he looks like Reagan, and he's got 2 6-guns. Comrade Yazov, that's the name of the Russian leader. I don't even think that's a Russian name. He is Brezhnev. No change. He's Leonid Brezhnev. Chairperson Feng is pretty much if Mao Zedong was a lady.
Oh, man.
And then the Supreme Rahma is Idi Amin.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, it's
Wow,
They're
dropping everything right now.
Exactly. South Africa is still under apartheid, and like the U.S. is kind of and the UK actually is working out all the best. They're just sort of rudderless. And this anthropology student is I wish I had it in front of me now because I thought I had all the details of the story, but he ends up in Glastonbury, and he ends up in finding the burial chamber of King Arthur.
Oh, God.
Arthur rises, he introduces himself, gets the situation explained to him, and this is the second coming of Arthur. Like, Merlin emerges from the cave, and
I'm not gonna lie, this sounds super awesome.
It is. It's cheesy as hell, but it is super awesome. And the knights are actually reincarnated as various people.
That's
Lancelot
cool.
is this like French industrialist billionaire. Kay is this American sort of wormy street punk. What was it? Galahad is a Japanese samurai. I swear to God.
Why not?
Why not?
That's awesome. Where they have to just collect all the knights and
let me just double check because I'm trying to think like who's who because I know that Sir Tristan is actually reincarnated as a woman, which causes him a great deal of angst. And
so they realize who they were.
Yeah, they realize who they were, and because Arthur and this kid Tom go around with this medallion that Merlin gave them, and it kind of resurfaces their memories.
Okay, so all right, so it's like their old memories in new bodies.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's kind of trippy. I like that.
It is. It's pretty trippy. But it's very 80s because it's just you have to save the world from sort of 1,000 years of unchecked 80s.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And the American president's like this cowboy-looking guy who he doesn't have a lot of the Reaganisms, but he's designed to look like Reagan. I'm trying to think. And the bad guy is actually Morgan Le Fay.
Nice.
Who was banished to Venus and came back with this army of alien soldiers that she trained, like this primitive tribe that she gave equipment. And
dude, this sounds so absolutely bananas. Do you have this yourself?
I do.
I need to see that next time I come to visit. That sounds amazing. It
was supposed to be like within a 12-month period, but it was a schedule slip from like 82 to 85. So, but no, very, very 80s, very 80s politics about things, the major power blocks, and eventually they're dissolved in the face of Arthurian legend.
Sure.
But yeah, no, like getting back to what we were talking about, how people seem to think that certain things will go on forever.
Yeah.
And, but yeah.
Well, all right. Speaking of things going on forever, we're neglecting one of my favorite villains of all time, Kraven the Hunter.
Oh, yeah.
who is totally as Russian as you could be, basically.
Oh, you're telling me Sergei Kravinov is Russian?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. But I know, like, they fled to the U.S. with their family. Like, he's Russian nobility and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so he was around in the 60s. But
yeah, 60s, 70s, I think.
I didn't read a lot of Spider-Man in the 80s. Like, I got more into proper Spider-Man comics in the 90s. But I do know that he was, like, obviously a prominent figure. Every time I looked at covers, Craven was always doing something. Did they use him very much as, like, part of the Red Scare in the 80s? Because he kind of did his own thing.
He really did his own thing. He was descended from Russian aristocracy, but he was just sort of the big game hunter. He just sort of was like the most dangerous game sort of fellow.
Yeah.
The Chameleon, who was his best friend.
No, his half brother.
Was he?
I'm pretty sure.
Yes, he was. You're right. You're right.
He was. Oh God, I can't remember his real name. I know he was related somehow.
Dmitry Smendrakov.
There you go. Close enough.
But yeah, no, okay, yeah, but I think his ability to impersonate eventually brought him to the attention of the communist countries. So
okay.
they trained him as a spy.
There we go.
So yeah, he was meant to be like the Red Scare, like, oh, they could be anyone. He could be a hero, he could be a villain.
Yeah, Craven was always interesting to me though, because even though he was obviously Russian and, you know, he had the accent in the cartoons, as a character, even though he was Russian, I don't ever remember him, like, raising the banner.
No, no, he wasn't created to raise the banner. Like, obviously, I think in those cases, you almost think they used Russian as just sort of the knee-jerk thing.
Yeah.
Like, even if he wasn't, like, a communist or, you know, fighting for Glorious Mother Russia.
Yep.
You know, the fact that he was a Russian would make, bad guy.
Right.
Duh.
Exactly.
And, but yeah, no, it was, the Chameleon was more the speed on that. But then they had in Marvel the Soviet Super Soldiers, which was sort of the, I guess you could say, kind of Soviet counterpart to the Avengers.
Yeah.
Trying to remember, do you remember any of the characters in that? Because then they sort of, like, because Crimson Dynamo was one of them. He was in that team.
He was part of it, and he's the only one I remember.
Yep, and let's see, Marvel Comics Database. Thank you for this. Yeah, we did our research. Don't you worry. But
this is such a huge topic that we've gone around and come back out the other side so many times just talking.
We
about
really
this.
have. We really have. But then I also like, because obviously the Russians were a monolith. You always had to do something that was vaguely that was associated with Russia. Like one of the members was Ursa Major, who was a bear man.
Right.
Giant bear, and who else?
There's something about Marvel liking to do teams that dealt with cold countries.
Yeah,
because there were like Canadian teams, and there were Russian teams, and there were like Asgard teams, which are basically Vikings. You know what I mean? But there were never I don't remember any Asian teams or any South American teams.
No, then the Soviet Super Soldiers became good, and the bad team became the Supreme Soviets.
Yeah.
And I mean, we can't really bring Black Widow into this because she's been around much longer than the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I was going to bring up, Boris and Natasha, but they were not, well, that's a little bit predating.
And let's be fair, Pennsylvania, totally different bag.
Right, that's true.
From Russia. No, they were more sort of fascist, actually.
Yeah, right.
But, I mean, you think back and, just the core of it is that it was us and them, and then it was a kind of a weird way to end the 80s, but very appropriate.
Yep. And it's one of those things where we were still in the throes of, I remember as a kid, any excuse to wave a flag.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like for us when we were kids, we had especially the whole anti-drug PSAs.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime something that we wanted to oppose, we declared a war on it. There was the war on drugs or the war on whatever. And so, I don't know, I still think we were sort of in that propaganda phase in the 80s. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So having so many Russian or Soviet villains was just kind of an excuse to make all these Americans be like, oh yeah, we can get behind this because TV tells us so.
And I mean, we think we're polarized now, but in the 80s, I don't know, Mike, did you ever watch The Americans?
The Americans, no.
On FX about the couple that are deep cover Russian spies who look at it's awesome. They set in the 80s, and they're pretty much deep cover Russian spies who are posing as just the normal American family.
Trippy.
And it's really awesome. But what it covers is that in the 80s, especially at the start of the 80s, Reagan was scary.
Yeah.
Reagan was like the cowboy. I mean, regardless of your political leanings to the Russians, it was very weird to see this guy who was kind of very much, bringing on attitude towards communism.
It's the cowboy thing. I remember there was the Robin Williams live at the Met in the 80s, and he was talking about Reagan kind of losing it. And he'd just be like, I'm with you, Duke. I'll get the Contra ponies and we'll be out of here.
Yeah, he just wants to install swinging doors in Congress.
Right.
Especially, and I was watching this show. It was a miniseries, 80s, the decade that something. Okay. And one of the things they talked about in the early 80s, which fed into a lot of the excess, I guess, is that because we were so close to complete and total annihilation, I guess, people sort of spend, and it became like this consumer culture. And then when Reagan became prominent, we sort of got our mojo back.
Yep.
And so between that and the 80s consumer culture, it cooled relations with Russia because obviously hyper capitalism versus communism doesn't make for great bedfellows.
Right.
But then they just sort of collapsed.
Well, I got to go back to the Yakov Smirnoff joke that I remember.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
I remember, it's like Yuri and Andropov are talking, and Yuri says, "You are my comrade. You are my brother. Would you share everything with me?" And Yuri, Andropov says, "Yes, of course. I would share everything." He says, "If you had 2 cars, would you give me one?" He says, "Yes, of course I would give you one of my cars. You're my comrade. Would you give me one of your boats?" "Yes, of course. If I had many boats, I would give you a boat." And they go through this long line of, if I had this, would you give me this? Yes. And he goes, "Well, if you had 2 chickens, would you give me chicken?" He goes, "No." And he says, "Yuri, my comrade, why you not give me chicken?" He says, "Well, I actually have 2 chickens."
Okay, and on that note, with the great, and speaking of another fellow whose career just sort of took a weird turn
into nowhere.
Communism.
Who, by the way, lives in Branson, Missouri now.
Branson, Missouri. Yeah, and I think he's a professor. He's like an acting professor.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It's very, very funny like that. And I think on the joke of the great Russian philosopher Smirnoff, I think we'll call it an evening.
Yes, sir.
But I just wanted to thank you, Mike, for taking the time, and regardless of your numbed jaw,
my horseshoe lip has seemed to mostly heal at this point.
Where we were talking about how you sort of sound like Eddie Murphy's father in the comedy routine.
Gus, why is this fire so big, Gus?
Why is this fire so big,
It
Gus?
was uncanny. We were talking before this podcast. I sounded just like him.
You did, and I couldn't stop laughing. I was willing to make you go on and regardless of how you sounded, just so you could sound like that. But anyway, thank you, Mike, for helping me out this week.
Sure.
And thank you, everyone, for listening. And we will be back next week with another 80s reboot movie countdown. Have a good weekend, all.
All right. Good night, everybody.
We hope you've enjoyed this show. This podcast is part of the 80s Reboot Overdrive channel on Southgate Media Group. You can follow us on Facebook on the 80s Reboot group page. We're also on Twitter and Tumblr at 80s Reboot. We invite you to check out all the wonderful podcasts and blogs available at southgatemediagroup.com. And thank you for reliving the 80s.